During a cruel storm, a hungry girl runs alone through the streets. As she passes through the gate of a luxury condominium, she hides among the bushes, unaware that everything would change there. A lonely businessman finds her, and, instead of ignoring her, invites her into his home. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. The rain poured down over Chicago, as if the sky had finally torn open once and for all. The streets of Lincoln Park transformed into turbulent rivers, swallowing storm drains and sweeping away everything in their path. Between luxurious apartment buildings and mansions protected by high walls, a small figure struggled against the storm. Emma ran barefoot through the flooded sidewalks, her tiny feet splashing in icy puddles that seemed to swallow her with each step. The pink dress she wore, already torn in several places, clung to her frail body like a wet second skin. In her small hands, she firmly clutched a piece of French bread she had managed to grab from the corner bakery when no one was looking. Her stomach had been aching with hunger for 3 days. The shouts of the men chasing her blended with the deafening noise of thunder. "Come back here, kid! You're going to pay for that!" Sylvester's voice echoed between the buildings, filled with anger. He was the bakery owner, a hefty man who didn't tolerate petty theft, even when it came from starving children. Emma knew these streets well. In the past few months, since she had escaped from the municipal shelter, they had become her home. She knew where to hide during the day, where to find food scraps in the late afternoon, and most importantly, she knew how to run. But on that night, with the torrential rain obscuring her vision, even she felt lost. When she turned onto Pleasant Hill Road, her eyes fixed on the large iron gate of a residential complex. The golden lights emanating from inside cruelly contrasted with the darkness of the storm. It was as if she were looking at another world, a place where the rain couldn't penetrate, where fear had no place. Desperate, Emma examined the gate and noticed a small opening in the side grating, close to the ground. It was too small for an adult, but perfect for a 6-year-old child. Without thinking twice, she crouched down and began to crawl through the hole. The rusty iron scratched her thin arms, leaving red marks that mixed with the rainwater, but she didn't stop. On the other side of the gate, the world was completely different. The ground was paved with well-maintained cobblestones. The gardens were symmetrical and lush, and ornamental lampposts illuminated paths that seemed to lead to paradise. Emma hid behind a large azalea bush, her small body trembling as much from cold as from admiration. She had never seen anything like this up close. Every detail of the complex radiated wealth and care. The houses were enormous, with illuminated windows that offered glimpses of crystal chandeliers and elegant furniture. It was as if she had crossed a portal into a fairy tale. From her hiding place, Emma could hear Sylvester's shouts from the other side of the wall, but now they seemed distant, almost unreal. The rain continued to fall, but the well-pruned trees offered some protection. For the first time in a long while, she felt relatively safe. It was then that she heard the sound of an engine approaching. A black BMW glided smoothly along the illuminated path, its wheels making minimal noise on the wet pavement. The car stopped in front of one of the largest houses in the complex, a modern 2-story construction with large glass windows. Emma held her breath when she saw a man get out of the vehicle. He was tall, probably in his 40s, and wore a dark suit that seemed impeccable even in the rain. His brown hair was slightly wet, and he carried an executive briefcase. As he walked toward the door of the house, his movements were precise, calculated, like someone accustomed to routine. The man's name was Richard Anderson, although Emma didn't know that yet. He was a partner at one of the largest financial consulting firms in Chicago, owned a house worth millions, and drove a car that cost more than many people earn in a lifetime. But as he opened his front door on that rainy night, Richard felt completely empty. His routine was always the same: wake up at 6 in the morning, drink an espresso, drive to the office in Gold Coast, spend the entire day analyzing numbers and investments, return home at 9 at night, eat dinner alone, and go to bed. Weekends were dedicated to work or empty social commitments with people he barely really knew. When Richard was about to enter his house, something made him stop. Her subtle movement behind the bushes caught his attention. At first he thought it might be a cat or some lost animal, but then a small figure slowly emerged from the vegetation. Emma was soaked from head to toe. Her brown hair stuck to her face, and her large, deep brown eyes shone with a mixture of fear and determination. She approached slowly, each step a courageous decision. "Please, sir." Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the sound of the rain, but it carried a surprising dignity for a child. "I just need a little corner in the garden, or maybe in the doghouse just until the rain stops." Richard was paralyzed. In his 42 years of life, he had never encountered a situation like this. The child before him was clearly a street girl, but there was something about her that touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the polite way she had made her request, or perhaps it was the fact that even in desperate conditions she kept her head held high. "No," said Richard, and Emma lowered her eyes, preparing to run again. "You won't sleep in the garden or in the doghouse?" He paused, his words coming out with a gentleness he hadn't expected from himself. "You deserve much more than that. Come in." Emma raised her eyes, incredulous. Was it possible that this elegant man was really inviting her into his house? She had learned to distrust everyone, especially adults, but something in Richard's voice reassured her. "Can I really come in?" she asked, still hesitant. "Yes, you can. Come on, you're soaked and shivering with cold." Emma followed Richard to the door of the house, her bare feet leaving small puddles of water on the marble floor of the entrance. When the doors opened, she found herself in a world that surpassed even her wildest fantasies. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall had an extremely high ceiling with a crystal chandelier that hung like a cascade of light. To the left, a marble staircase curved elegantly toward the second floor. To the right, a spacious living room with Italian leather sofas and a huge screen television dominated the environment. Emma stopped at the entrance, dripping water onto the polished floor. She had never seen so much luxury concentrated in one place. Each object seemed to be worth more than she could ever imagine. Abstract paintings decorated the walls, ornamental plants occupied strategic corners, and the smell of the house was different from anything she knew, an aroma of cleanliness, wealth, and solitude. "Stay here for a moment," said Richard, disappearing. For a few minutes. When he returned, he brought soft towels and a robe that, although much too big for Emma, would be infinitely more comfortable than her wet clothes. "Go to that bathroom over there." He pointed to a door near the living room. "Take off those wet clothes and dry yourself well. Then we'll see what to do." Emma obeyed in silence. The guest bathroom in Richard's house was larger than any room where she had ever slept. The mirror occupied an entire wall, and she could see herself completely for the first time in months. The image frightened her. She was very thin, with deep dark circles under her eyes and small cuts on her arms caused by the complex's gait. As she dried herself with the soft towels, Emma wondered if this was real or just a dream. Was it possible that she had finally found someone willing to help her without wanting something in return? In her short life, she had learned that nothing was free, that every gesture of kindness hid an intention. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in the robe that dragged on the floor, she found Richard in the kitchen preparing hot chocolate. The environment was modern, with granite countertops and appliances that seemed to have come straight out of a decorating magazine. "Sit down," he said, indicating one of the high stools near the counter. Emma climbed with difficulty onto the stool, her feet dangling in the air. Richard placed a steaming mug of chocolate in front of her and a plate with cookies. She looked at the food as if it were a treasure, her small hands holding the mug with reverence. "What's your name?" asked Richard, sitting beside her. "Emma," she answered softly, blowing on the hot chocolate. "Emma is a pretty name. How old are you?" 6. I think 6. I'm not entirely sure." The answer hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. A 6-year-old child who wasn't sure of her own age, wandering alone through the streets of Chicago. He wanted to ask about her parents, about how she had ended up on the street, but instinctively knew those were questions for later. "And you? What's your name?" asked Emma, surprising herself with her own courage. "Richard. Richard Anderson." "Mr. Richard," she repeated, trying out the name. "Why did you let me in? Everyone always sends me away." The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Richard didn't know how to explain what he had felt when he saw that wet child emerging from the bushes. Perhaps it was the loneliness he had carried for years, or perhaps it was simply the humanity he thought he had lost amid the numbers and spreadsheets of the corporate world. "Because you looked like you needed help," he said finally. "And because that's what people do, they help each other." Emma drank her chocolate in silence, absorbing every word. For the first time in a long time, she felt warm inside, and it wasn't just because of the hot drink. It was because of the genuine kindness of this strange man who had transformed the worst night of her life into the best. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Richard's house a small seed of hope was beginning to germinate. Neither of them knew it yet, but that casual encounter on a rainy September night would change their lives forever. The clock on the wall marked almost midnight when Richard noticed that Emma was fighting against sleep, her small eyes closing involuntarily. He knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't simply send the girl away in the middle of the storm, but he also didn't quite know how to handle the situation. "Emma," he said softly, "you can sleep in the guest room tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow, okay?" She just nodded, trusting, completely in this man who had offered her much more than she had ever dared to ask for. As Richard led her to the room on the second floor, Emma marveled once more at the magnificence of the house. The guest room was larger than any place she had ever slept, with a king-size bed covered in white sheets that looked like clouds. When Richard covered her with the soft comforter, Emma lightly held the sleeve of his shirt. "Mr. Richard," she whispered, "thank you. I promise I won't cause any trouble." "Don't worry about that now," he replied, gently touching her forehead. "Sleep well." When Richard went downstairs, the house had never seemed so silent to him, but it was a different silence than usual. It was no longer the oppressive loneliness that accompanied him every night. It was the quietness of someone who is no longer alone. Meanwhile, in the room upstairs, Emma looked out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in her life, she felt something she didn't know how to name. Later, she would learn that this feeling was called security. The storm was slowly showing signs of passing, but the changes it had brought to Richard and Emma's lives were just the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of love, courage, and human determination. Richard woke up earlier than usual, not because of the alarm clock, but because of an uneasiness he couldn't explain. The memory of the previous night returned like a wave. The wet girl, the large eyes full of fear and hope, the impulsive decision to bring her inside. For the first time in years, he had broken his mechanical routine, and now he didn't quite know how to proceed. He descended the stairs silently, trying not to make noise. The house was different, charged with a new energy. It was no longer just his solitary refuge, but a shared space. The sensation was strange and, curiously, not unpleasant. In the kitchen, while preparing coffee, Richard found himself thinking about Emma. How had such a small child ended up alone on the streets? Where were her parents? And most importantly, what should he do now? His structured life, made up of calculated commitments and responsibilities, didn't include space for abandoned children. When he went upstairs to check if she was still sleeping, he found the room empty. The comforter was carefully folded, as if Emma had tried to leave everything tidy before departing. Richard's heart raced. She had fled during the night. "Emma," he called, running down the stairs. "Emma, are you there?" A noise from the kitchen made him stop. When he got there, he found a scene that left him speechless. Emma was standing on a chair, trying to reach the sink faucet. She had found a dish towel and was trying to clean the counter where she had had chocolate the night before. "Good morning, Mr. Richard," she said without looking back, focused on her task. "I was trying to clean up the mess I made yesterday. Sorry for waking you up." Richard stood watching her for a few moments. The girl was still wearing the oversized robe, which was now improvised, tied at the waist. Her brown hair was disheveled, but she worked with determination, as if cleaning were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't need to do that," he said softly, approaching. "You didn't make any mess." Emma finally turned to look at him, and Richard could see that she was different from the night before. The daylight revealed details that darkness had concealed. Her cheeks were thinner than he had realized, and there were small scars on her arms and legs, marks of a hard life that no child should know. "I always clean up after using something," she explained, getting down from the chair. "It's so I don't cause trouble." The simple phrase revealed a lot about the life Emma had led. Richard wondered how many times she had been rejected, how many doors she had found closed, to have learned so early that her presence was a nuisance. "You must be hungry," he said, changing the subject. "How about we have breakfast together?" Emma's eyes lit up, but she hesitated. "I don't want to get in the way. You must have important things to do." Richard looked at his watch. It was 8 in the morning on a Saturday. Normally he would be checking emails or reviewing reports, but at that moment, nothing seemed more important than preparing breakfast for this girl. "I don't have anything more important to do than have breakfast with you," he said, and realized he was being completely sincere. As they prepared breakfast together, Richard observed each of Emma's reactions. She handled everything with extreme care, as if each object were too fragile for her small hands. When he offered French bread with butter, she took only a small piece, but her eyes showed that she wanted much more. "You can eat as much as you want," encouraged Richard. "There's plenty of food." "Really?" she asked, incredulous. "Really?" Emma then revealed how hungry she was. She ate 3 pieces of bread with butter, drank 2 glasses of milk, and even tried the fruits that Richard had placed on the table. But she did so with delicacy, chewing slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be the last. "Emma," said Richard when they finished eating, "can you tell me how you ended up on the street yesterday?" The girl immediately tensed. Her eyes shifted to the window, and Richard realized he had touched on a painful subject. "I ran away," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Ran away from where?" "From the shelter, St. Vincent's home in Wicker Park." Richard knew the place by name. It was one of the charitable institutions that his company financially supported, but he had never visited personally. "Why did you run away?" Emma played with the hem of the robe before answering. There were too many children there, more than 50, and only 3 ladies to take care of everyone. They weren't bad, but... She paused, searching for the right words. "But I was just one more. Nobody really knew me. Nobody knew that I like stars, or that I'm afraid of thunder when I'm alone." The simplicity of the answer hit Richard deeply. Emma hadn't run away because of mistreatment or serious neglect. She had run away because of the lack of something that every child deserves. Individual attention, personalized affection, the feeling of being special to someone. "And your parents?" he asked carefully. "I don't have parents. I never did. Miss Martha from the shelter said I was left at the door of a church when I was a baby, with just a note saying my name was Emma." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. This girl had faced life alone from the first day, and yet she maintained a sweetness and politeness that many privileged children didn't possess. "And you, Mr. Richard?" asked Emma, changing the focus of the conversation. "Do you have family?" Question caught him off guard. "No," he answered. "I don't have a wife or children. My parents passed away a few years ago." "Then we're alike," said Emma with a small smile. "We're both alone." The girl's observation was like a mirror being placed in front of him. Richard had never thought of himself as alone in the same way as a street child. His loneliness was chosen, wrapped in comfort and luxury. But deep down she was right. Both were navigating through life without true bonds, without people who really knew them. "Emma," he said after a moment, "would you like to stay here for a few days, until we decide what to do?" The girl's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious, but I can't pay." "You don't need to pay anything. Just be yourself." Emma jumped from the chair and ran to hug Richard. It was a desperate hug, as if she feared he might change his mind. Richard, who hadn't received a genuine hug in years, felt completely disarmed by the intensity of the girl's emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Richard. I promise I'll be the best guest in the world. I'll help with everything. I won't mess up anything, and—" "Hey," he said, holding her small shoulders, "you don't need to be perfect. Just be a child." That morning, Richard cancelled all his weekend commitments. They went to the nearest shopping mall, an experience that revealed even more about Emma's world. When they entered the children's clothing store, she was paralyzed in front of the colorful racks. "You can choose some pieces," said Richard. "Clothes that you like." Emma touched the fabrics with reverence, as if she were in a museum. "Can I choose any of them?" "Any of them." She chose only 3 outfits, all in sober tones, and Richard had to insist that she get more variety, including some colorful pieces. At the shoe store, when she tried on the first pair of new shoes in her life, her eyes filled with tears. "Do they hurt?" asked Richard, concerned. "No," she replied, wiping her eyes. "It's just that they're the most beautiful shoes I've ever seen, and they're mine." During lunch at the mall's food court, Emma observed everything around her with intense curiosity. The families eating together, the children running between tables, the parents reprimanding misbehaving children. It was as if she were studying a behavior she had never witnessed up close. "The children here are different," she commented. "Different how?" "They complain about the food. They throw tantrums. They ignore their parents. But the parents still stay there, taking care of them." Richard realized that Emma was learning about unconditional love just by observing. For her, who had always had to behave perfectly to avoid being rejected, the idea that someone could love her even when she was difficult was revolutionary. When they returned home, Richard showed Emma all the rooms. She was especially fascinated with the library, running her fingers over the spines of the books as if they were treasures. "Can you read?" he asked. "A little. Miss Martha taught me some basic things, but I really like books, even when I don't understand all the words." Richard picked up a book of illustrated children's stories. "How about we read together?" They spent the afternoon on the living room sofa, Emma leaning against Richard's arm while he read the stories. She asked constant questions, demonstrating a sharp intelligence and a thirst for knowledge that impressed him. When he began to read The Little Mermaid, she interrupted him. She wanted so badly to be part of another world that she was willing to give up her voice, commented Emma thoughtfully. "I understand her." The observation revealed a precocious maturity that broke Richard's heart. At 6 years old, Emma already understood metaphors about belonging and sacrifice that many adults didn't grasp. At night, when it was time to sleep, Emma hesitated at the door of the guest room. "Mr. Richard," she said softly, "thank you for the most beautiful day of my life." "It was a beautiful day for me too," he replied, and realized it was true. After Emma fell asleep, Richard sat in the living room thinking about the changes that a single day had brought to his life. His house, always silent and organized, had been filled with conversations, laughter, and an energy that he hadn't experienced in years. But along with the joy came concerns. He knew nothing about caring for children, and more importantly, what would happen when the outside world discovered about Emma? She was technically a runaway from an institution. There were protocols to follow, authorities to contact. Richard took his laptop and began to research adoption, temporary guardianship, and children's shelters. The information he found was discouraging. The process was bureaucratic, lengthy, and uncertain. And meanwhile, Emma could be taken back to the shelter. Outside, Chicago continued its frantic nightlife, millions of people following their routines, worried about their own problems. But inside that house in Lincoln Park, a lonely man discovered that sometimes love arrives unexpectedly, bringing with it a responsibility that he didn't know if he was prepared to assume. What Richard didn't know yet was that the real challenges were just beginning. In the shadows of the city, people who knew Emma had already noticed her disappearance, and they weren't willing to let her go without a fight. While he planned a future with the girl, forces he couldn't imagine were already moving to bring her back to the world from which she had tried to escape. The storm of the previous night hadn't been just meteorological. It had been the harbinger of a series of events that would test the limits of love, courage, and determination of both. But For that night, in the safety of the quiet house, Richard and Emma slept in peace, still unaware of the challenges that awaited them. The first chapter of their lives together had ended, but the story they were writing together was just beginning to unfold. Emma's second week in Richard's house passed like a dream. They had established a routine that, surprisingly, pleased them both. Richard worked from home in the morning while Emma played in the garden or read in the library. In the afternoon, they went out together for outings that were constant discoveries for the girl: the zoo, Grant Park, downtown Chicago. Emma absorbed everything with an insatiable curiosity. At the zoo, she was fascinated by the elephants, saying, "They seem sad because they were far from home." In the park, she ran for the first time on well-maintained grass, her laughter echoing among the trees. In the city center, she observed the historic buildings with admiration, asking questions about who had lived there and when they had been built. Richard discovered that taking care of Emma wasn't just a responsibility, but also a source of joy he hadn't expected. The girl had brought color to his monochromatic life. Her curiosity made him see Chicago with new eyes. Her questions made him reflect on things he had taken for granted for years. But on Monday of the third week, reality began to knock at the door. Richard was at his work desk when the house intercom rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and Emma was in the garden, playing with a puzzle they had bought over the weekend. When he answered, the doorman's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Anderson, there's a social worker here who wants to speak with you. Says it's about a child." Richard's heart raced. He knew this moment would come, but he hadn't imagined it would be so soon. "You can let her come up," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. In the few minutes that preceded the visitor's arrival, Richard called Emma inside and explained the situation. The girl turned pale, her large eyes filling with fear. "Are they going to take me back?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Emma, but we'll face this together, okay?" When the doorbell rang, Richard opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, with grey hair tied in a bun and gentle eyes behind prescription glasses. She wore simple clothes and carried a worn leather folder. "Mr. Richard Anderson? I'm Beth Sanders, a social worker from the Department of Social Services. May I come in?" "Of course, please do." Beth entered the living room and immediately spotted Emma, who was hiding behind the sofa, only part of her face visible. "Hi, Emma," said Beth softly. "Remember me? I'm Miss B from the shelter." Emma slowly came out from behind the sofa, but stayed close to Richard. "Hi, Miss B. Everyone at the shelter is very worried about you. They've all been looking for you." Richard stepped forward. "Ms. Sanders, I can explain." "Please, just call me Beth. And yes, I would very much like an explanation." They sat in the living room, Emma glued to Richard's side. Beth took a notepad from her folder but didn't start writing immediately. Instead, she carefully observed the interaction between the man and the girl. "Mr. Anderson, how did you meet Emma?" Richard told the whole story: the storm, how he found the wet girl in the garden, the decision to bring her inside. Beth listened in silence, making occasional notes. "And you, Emma?" she asked when Richard finished. "How has it been staying here?" "It's the best place I've ever lived," Emma replied without hesitation. "Mr. Richard is very good to me. He reads stories, took me shopping for clothes, and never yells or gets angry." Beth noticed the genuine affection in the girl's voice, but also her tension. It was obvious that Emma was afraid of being taken away. "Emma, can you go play in the garden for a few minutes? I need to talk to Mr. Richard about adult things." The girl looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "You can go, dear. I'll be right here." When they were alone, Beth got straight to the point. "Mr. Anderson, I understand that your intentions are good, but the situation is complicated. Emma is a ward of the state. She ran away from an official institution and has been missing for 3 weeks. Technically, you committed a crime by not reporting to the authorities that she was here." "I know that," admitted Richard. "But she was hungry, wet, scared. I couldn't simply ignore her. And you did the right thing by helping her. But now we need to regularize the situation." Beth looked out the window, where she could see Emma sitting in the garden, hugging her knees. The girl's posture was defensive, as if she were preparing for yet another rejection. "May I be frank with you?" asked Beth. "Please," In 15 years working with abandoned children, I've rarely seen a transformation like Emma's. When she ran away from the shelter, she was thin, skittish, spoke little. Today, she's visibly healthier, more confident. It's obvious she has received loving care. Richard felt momentary relief, but Beth continued. However, that doesn't resolve the legal aspects. Emma needs to be under officially recognized care. Either she goes back to the shelter or what? You could apply for temporary guardianship, eventually followed by an adoption process. But it's not simple. There are psychological evaluations, social studies, home visits, and throughout the process, which can take months, Emma would have to return to the shelter. The information hit Richard like a blow. Is there no other alternative? Beth thought for a moment. There is a possibility. If I certify that Emma is in a safe environment and that there is a genuine commitment to care, I can grant a temporary emergency guardianship for 30 days. This would give you time to initiate the proper legal process. What do I need to do? First, I need to verify some things. Your financial situation, criminal background, home conditions. I also need to talk more with Emma to make sure she's really well here. Richard nodded. All right, do whatever is necessary. Beth spent the next 2 hours conducting a thorough evaluation. She examined each room of the house, checked the refrigerator and pantry, observed how Richard and Emma interacted. She spoke at length with the girl, asking about her routine, if she felt afraid of anything, if anyone had hurt her. Emma's answers were consistent. She was happy, safe, and loved. For the first time in her life, she felt she belonged somewhere. Mr. Anderson, said Beth when she finished, I'll grant the temporary emergency guardianship, but with conditions. You have 30 days to file the legal process. I'll make follow-up visits each week, and Emma needs to start attending school. School? Richard hadn't thought about that. She's 6 years old. It's mandatory, and it will be good for her to socialize with other children. After Beth left, leaving a stack of forms for Richard to fill out, he and Emma sat in the living room processing what had happened. I don't have to leave, asked Emma, still insecure. Not for now, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. In Mile. The following days, Richard immersed himself in the bureaucratic process of regularizing Emma's situation. He hired a lawyer specialized in family law, gathered all the necessary documents, and began filling out endless forms. He also started looking for a school for Emma. They visited 3 private educational institutions in Lincoln Park, and at each all of them Emma behaved with extreme politeness, but Richard could sense her anxiety. She had never attended a regular school, and the prospect frightened her. It was during one of these visits that the first serious setback occurred. They were leaving St. Mary's Academy when Richard noticed they were being followed. A black car had been behind them since they left home, always maintaining the same distance. Emma, he said calmly, when we get home, I want you to go straight to your room and stay there until I call you, okay? Why? Did something happen? Probably nothing, but it's better to be careful. When they arrived at the complex, the car that was following them stopped across the street. Richard could see 2 men inside, but he didn't recognize them. He made sure to note the license plate before entering with Emma. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Richard received a call. The voice on the other end was grave, threatening. You have something that isn't yours, said the man. Who is this? Asked Richard, though he suspected the answer. Someone who knows the girl in your house very well. She belongs to the street, not to rich people's houses. And the street wants her back. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Little Emma was always clever at getting food, money. She was useful to us. And you're interfering with our business. Richard felt his blood freeze. What kind of business? The kind that's none of your business, but if you don't return the girl, we'll come get her, and maybe your nice house will have some accidents. Maybe your car. Maybe you yourself. Dafa. Call ended, leaving Richard in a state of shock. Emma hadn't just run away from the shelter. She had run away from people who were exploiting her in some way, and these people weren't willing to give up easily. Richard spent the night awake, standing guard. He installed additional security cameras, contacted a private security company, and began thinking about how to protect Emma without scaring her. The next morning, when she came down for breakfast with her usual smile, Richard made one of the most difficult decisions of his life. He couldn't tell her about the threats, but he needed to take precautions. "Emma," he said carefully, "remember when I talked about you making new friends at school?" "I remember." "Well, I thought maybe it would be better if we waited a bit longer. How about if I taught you some things here at home first? Math, reading, those kinds of things." Emma seemed relieved. "That would be great. I like learning with you more than with strangers." While she ate, Richard mentally planned the next security measures. He didn't know exactly who these men were, or what kind of exploitation they had forced Emma to suffer, but he was determined to protect her. What he didn't know was that the situation was about to get even more complicated. That afternoon, while Emma played in the garden under the watchful eye of the new security guards, a new player was about to enter the game. On the other side of the city, Beth Sanders was reviewing the report she had written about her visit to Richard's house. She had enough experience to recognize a loving home when she saw one, but also enough instinct to sense when something wasn't being said. She decided to do some investigations of her own into Emma's past. What she discovered made her immediately pick up the phone to call Richard. "Mr. Anderson, this is Beth. I need to see you urgently. And this time it's better if Emma isn't present for our conversation." Beth arrived at Richard's house in the early afternoon, her expression more serious than he had ever seen. She carried a voluminous folder with her, and the weight of information that clearly disturbed her. "Where is Emma?" she asked as soon as she entered. "She's at a swimming lesson at the club. I hired a private instructor for her. She'll be back in 2 hours." "Good, we need time." They sat in the living room, and Beth opened the folder on the coffee table. Richard could see photographs, official documents, and reports with stamps from various institutions. "Mr. Anderson, when I granted you temporary guardianship, it was based on what I observed here. Emma was visibly well cared for, happy, healthy, but something bothered me. A child doesn't develop the maturity and defense mechanisms she possesses just by living in a shelter." Beth took a photograph from the folder. It was Emma, but a few months younger, visibly thinner and with a much harder expression. This photo was taken by the police 8 months ago, during an operation in the city center. Emma was among a group of children who were being used for begging and petty theft. Richard felt his stomach turn. She was forced to steal? Worse than that. She was part of a network commanded by a man named Roger King, known on the streets as King. He recruits abandoned children, offers food and protection in exchange for work. What kind of work? Beth hesitated before answering. Begging during the day, small thefts when necessary. The older children did other things. Thank God, Emma was still too young to be used in that way. Richard stood up, beginning to pace around the room. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. The threatening calls, the car that followed them, Emma's expertise in remaining invisible, her ability to quickly assess dangerous situations. How did she get out of that situation? There was a police operation. Several children were rescued, including Emma. Roger was arrested but managed to get out on bail. The children were sent to different shelters around the city. "And why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because the records were in different files. I only managed to connect the information when I began investigating her past more deeply after our conversation." Beth took another document from the folder. "But there's more. Roger King was released 2 weeks ago, and since then, several children who were under his protection have begun to disappear from the shelters." Richard's blood ran cold. "He's recruiting the children back." "Exactly. And Emma was one of the most productive in his group. Intelligent, quick, able to inspire pity in people. For him, she's a valuable investment." Richard told Beth about the threatening calls and the car that had followed them. She listened in silence, taking notes. "Mr. Anderson, the situation is more dangerous than we imagined. This man won't give up easily, and he has resources, a network of people willing to do anything for money. What do you suggest?" "First, We need to accelerate the adoption process. I'll use my influence to prioritize it. Second, you need police protection. And third, she hesitated. Third, what? Third, it might be better to consider temporarily moving to another city until Roger is arrested again. The suggestion hit Richard like lightning. Leaving Chicago would mean abandoning his company, his life, everything he had built. I can't. Do that? My company. Mr. Anderson, with all due respect, your company won't be worth anything if something happens to you too. They were interrupted by the intercom. The doorman informed that Emma had returned from swimming and was coming up. Richard and Beth quickly put away the documents. When Emma entered, still with wet hair and a towel in her hands, she immediately sensed the tension in the environment. "Hi, Miss B," she said, but her eyes moved between the two adults, trying to decipher what was happening. "Hi, dear. How was the swimming lesson?" "It was great. Teacher Carla said I have a natural talent for water." Emma approached Richard. "Did something happen? You both look worried." Richard exchanged a look with Beth. They had discussed this. How much to tell Emma about her situation? "Emma," said Beth gently, "sit here with me. I need to ask some questions about the time before you arrived at the shelter." The girl immediately stiffened. "Why?" "To better protect you." Emma looked at Richard, seeking reassurance. He sat beside her, holding her small hand. "You can tell Miss B everything. She's here to help us." In an almost inaudible voice, Emma began to talk about her life before the shelter. She told about Roger, whom she called Uncle King, about how he had found her when she was only 4 years old, sleeping under a viaduct. "He gave me food and told me I could stay with him if I helped with the little jobs," she explained. "At first I would just stand in front of the church asking for money to eat. People always gave more money to small children." Richard felt his hands trembling with anger, but kept his voice calm. "And after that?" "After that, I learned to take things from stores when no one was looking. Small things that people wouldn't miss," Uncle King said. "It was just so we could get food." "Emma," said Beth softly, "did Uncle King hurt you when you couldn't do the little jobs?" The girl lowered her eyes. "Sometimes. But it wasn't so bad. It was better than starving." The normalcy with which Emma spoke about her exploitation broke Richard's heart. For her, a child who had never known true protection, that life had been the best available alternative. "And when were you taken to the shelter?" continued Beth. "It was some policemen. They said they were going to take us to a better place. I didn't want to go at first because I didn't know them, but Uncle King had disappeared for a few days and we were very hungry." Emma paused, playing with the hem of her shirt. The shelter was different. There were rules, but there was also food every day, and nobody forced me to work, but it was very crowded, and I felt lost among so many people. "That's why you ran away," said Richard, beginning to understand. "That's why I ran away. I wanted to find a place that was just mine. And then that storm came and I found you." Beth observed the interaction between Richard and Emma with professional attention. It was obvious that there was a genuine bond between them, but it was also clear that the girl still carried deep traumas. "Emma," she said, "Uncle King is free now, and he might be looking for you." The girl's reaction was immediate. She shrunk back, her eyes widened with fear, and she instinctively moved closer to Richard. "Will he force me to go back?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Not if I can help." "Git," said Richard firmly. "Nobody is going to take you from here." "But you don't understand," said Emma, beginning to cry. "Uncle King doesn't give up. He always says that the children are his, that he took care of us when nobody else cared, and he has many friends, adults who do what he tells them." Richard hugged Emma, feeling her small body tremble. "Emma, look at me. You are not anyone's property. You are a child who deserves to be protected and loved, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that." Beth stood up. "Mr. Anderson, I need to make some calls. I'll contact the police and initiate a protection protocol. I'll also accelerate the adoption process with justified emergency." After Beth left, Richard and Emma remained in the living room. The girl was quiet, lost in thoughts that no 6-year-old should have. "Mr. Richard," she said finally, "if Uncle King comes to get me, will you hand me over?" The question was like a dagger to Richard's heart. "Never. Why did you ask that?" "Because I've been handed over before. When I was very little, a lady found me on the street and took me to her house. She was very good to me for a few weeks, but when Uncle King showed up, she got scared and gave me to him." Richard knelt in front of Emma, holding her small hands between his. "Emma, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I'm not like that lady. I'm not going to hand you over to anyone, no matter what happens. You are my daughter now, and I will protect you with my life if necessary." For the first time since she had come home, Emma smiled. "You called me daughter. And that's what you are. The daughter of my heart." That night, Richard reinforced the security of the house. He contacted the security company to increase the number of guards, installed additional alarms, and even hired a personal bodyguard to accompany them when they went out. But while taking these precautions, a part of him knew it wouldn't be enough. Roger King had operated for years on the streets of Chicago. He knew the city, had contacts, resources, and most importantly, he had motivation. At midnight, Richard received another call. "I see you've increased security," said the familiar voice. "Smart, but it won't work." "What do you want?" asked Richard, trying to keep his voice steady. "I already told you I want my property back. The girl owes me 2 years of work, and you owe me for interfering with my business." "How much?" $50,000 in cash and the girl." "Never." "Then things are going to get difficult for you, Richard Anderson. I know where you work. I know where you live. I know that your company has important contracts that could become complicated if certain information reaches competitors." The call ended, leaving Richard with the certainty that they were entering a war that he didn't know if they could win. Upstairs, Emma was awake, looking out the window of her room. She had heard part of the telephone conversation and knew that the nightmare of her past life was returning. But this time she wasn't alone. And even though she was only 6 years old, Emma was determined to fight for her new family, just as Richard was fighting for her. What neither of them imagined was that the real battle was just beginning, and that in the coming days they would discover how far they were willing to go to protect each other. The following days passed in an almost unbearable tension. Richard had transformed his house into a fortress, with security guards making constant rounds and cameras monitoring every movement. Beth managed to accelerate the adoption process, but there were still a few weeks until final approval. Emma, in turn, demonstrated an impressive maturity for a 6-year-old child. She had realized the gravity of the situation and behaved with extreme care, never leaving her room alone, always alert to the sounds of the house. It was on a Thursday morning that everything changed. Richard was at his desk, reviewing contracts, when Emma came running down the stairs, her eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Richard, there are strange men in the backyard." Richard ran to the window and saw 3 men climbing the rear wall of the property. They had chosen the blind spot of the cameras, revealing a detailed knowledge of the house. "Emma, go to the panic room I showed you. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's okay." The panic room had been one of the security measures that Richard had installed. It was a small reinforced room with direct communication to the police and provisions to withstand any emergency. But when Richard turned around, Emma had disappeared. "Emma!" he shouted, running through the house. "Emma, where are you?" The sound of glass breaking came from the kitchen. Richard ran in that direction and found the back door wide open. On the floor, shards of the window and signs of a struggle. His cell phone rang immediately. "Got your little girl here with me," said Roger King's voice. "She was trying to escape through the back when my men arrived. Brave, but not very smart. If you hurt her, she's fine, for now. But that depends on you following my instructions exactly. What do you want? $100,000 in cash, and you come alone to deliver it. No police, no security guards, nobody." "Where?" "Know the abandoned warehouse on Victory Street in Old Town. Be there at 8 tonight, alone." The call ended, leaving Richard in despair. He immediately called Beth, who was on another home visit. "Beth, they took Emma." Who took her? What happened? Richard quickly explained the situation. Beth was silent for a few seconds before responding. Richard, you can't go alone. It's too dangerous. I don't have a choice. It's Emma. We have to call the police. He said if I bring the police, he disappears with her, and I believe him. Beth sighed. All right, but I'm going with you. He said for me to go alone. He won't see me. I know that area. I worked there for years. I can keep watch while you go in. At 7:30 in the evening, Richard was at the bank withdrawing the $100,000. His hands trembled as he signed the documents, but his determination was unwavering. Nothing in the world mattered more than bringing Emma back. Beth met him 2 blocks before the warehouse. She had changed from her social clothes into jeans and a dark jacket, and carried a cell phone with a direct line to the police. If something goes wrong, she said, I'll call the police immediately, no matter what they said about disappearing with her. Understood. The warehouse was located in a decaying industrial area of Old Town. At night, the region was deserted, with only a few streetlights working, the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Richard parked his car in front of the warehouse at 8 o'clock sharp. The building was an old brick construction with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. The main door was ajar. When he entered, it took a few seconds for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The interior of the warehouse was spacious, with support pillars dividing the space. Rusty machines occupied random corners, and the floor was covered with debris. Punctual. I like that. The voice came from behind one of the pillars. Roger. King emerged from the shadows, followed by 2 burly men. He was shorter than Richard had imagined, but his small eyes radiated a cruelty that made the businessman shudder. Where's Emma? Asked Richard, trying to keep his voice steady. First, the money. Richard raised the briefcase he was carrying. $100,000 as requested. Now I want to see the girl. Roger made a sign to one of his henchmen, who disappeared behind some stacked boxes. Moments later, he returned, pushing Emma in front of him. The girl was visibly frightened, but not hurt. Her clothes were dirty and her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw Richard, her face lit up with relief. Mr. Richard, she shouted, trying to run in his direction. The henchman held her by the arm, preventing her from moving. She's fine, as I promised, said Roger. Now put the money on the floor and step away. Richard obeyed, placing the briefcase a few meters away. Now let her go. Roger laughed, an unpleasant sound that echoed through the warehouse. You really thought it was going to be that simple? That I'd take the money and let you leave with my most valuable property? We had a deal. I changed my mind. The girl comes back with me, and you, well, you know too much about my business to simply walk away. The 2 henchmen began to approach Richard, while Roger walked toward the money briefcase. It was then that Emma did something completely unexpected. Uncle King, she said in a loud and clear voice, you shouldn't have come here. Roger stopped, surprised by the confident tone of the girl. And why not, Princess? Because I know things, many things. What kind of things? Emma freed herself from the henchman who was holding her. He had relaxed his guard upon hearing the conversation and walked a few steps toward Roger. I know where you hide the money. In Ms. Marlene's house, on Franklin Street, number 247. In the hall behind the stove. Roger's face paled. How do you know that? Because I paid attention. I always paid attention to everything. I also know that you have a brother who lives in Naperville, Jack King, who works in an auto repair shop, and that you're afraid of the police finding out about what happened to little Peter last year. Shut up, shouted Roger, his composure completely crumbling. But Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. I know the names of all your friends, Carl, who works at the junkyard, Joe, who sells candy at the traffic light on Lakeshore Drive, and I know where they live, where they keep their things, and what they do when they think no one is watching. Richard watched impressed. The 6-year-old girl was using information she had collected during the years under Roger's control as a weapon. She had memorized everything, stored every detail, waiting for the right moment to use this knowledge. And you know what? Continued Emma, now smiling slightly. I've already told all this to the police. That's a lie. It's true. Miss B asked me questions, and I answered everything. About you, about the others, about the places. They've been looking for you. For weeks. It was then that sirens began to sound in the distance, getting closer and closer. Roger and his henchmen panicked. You betrayed me. I protected myself, replied Emma with impressive dignity, and I protected my new family. The sirens were very close now. Beth had kept her promise. At the first sign of trouble, she had called the police. But it wasn't just that. She had also passed on all the information that Emma had provided during their conversations, allowing the police to mount a coordinated operation. Let's get out of here, shouted one of the henchmen. The police are coming. Roger looked at the money briefcase, then at Emma, then at Richard. His face was contorted with anger and frustration. This isn't over, he said, pointing his finger at Emma. You'll always be mine, and one day I'll— No, you won't, interrupted Richard, finally finding his voice, because you're going to be arrested, and Emma will be safe, far away from you, forever. The lights of police cars began to illuminate the broken windows of the warehouse. Roger and his men ran toward the back of the building, abandoning the money. Richard ran to Emma, who threw herself into his arms. I was so scared, she whispered, clinging to him as if she would never let go. But I knew you would come for— Fight that you— I'll always come for you, replied Richard, kissing the top of her head. Always. When the police invaded the warehouse, they found Richard and Emma embracing in the middle of the empty space, surrounded by the abandoned money briefcase and the echoes of a situation that had been resolved not by force, but by the intelligence and courage of a 6-year-old girl. Beth arrived shortly after, running to them. Are you okay? No one was hurt. We're fine, said Richard. Thanks to Emma. She was amazing. Emma looked at Beth with eyes still bright with tears, but also full of pride. Miss B, I used the information like you taught me, to protect myself. Beth knelt in front of the girl. You were very brave and very smart. The detective in charge of the operation approached them. We managed to arrest 2 of the men. The third escaped, but we have enough information to locate him quickly. And Roger King, asked Richard. Still being sought, but he won't remain free for long. The information the girl provided allowed us to dismantle his entire network. We've already arrested 6 more people in simultaneous operations around the city. As they left the warehouse, Emma held Richard's hand firmly. The city of Chicago stretched around them, millions of lights twinkling in the night, but for both the world had been reduced to that moment of safety and mutual love. Mr. Richard, said Emma when they got into the car, now can we stay together? Forever. Richard looked at Beth, who nodded with a smile. Yes, dear, forever. When they arrived home, the property was still full of security guards and investigators, but the atmosphere was completely different. It was no longer one of fear and tension, but of relief and hope. That night, after Emma fell asleep, in her bed finally safe, Richard sat in the living room talking with Beth about the next steps. The adoption process will be accelerated after today, she said. The judge has already been informed about the situation, and with Roger out of the picture, there are no more legal impediments. How long? A few weeks at most. Emma will officially be your daughter before Christmas. Richard smiled for the first time in days. She's already my daughter. The papers are just a formality. Beth was preparing to leave when she turned to Richard one last time. Mr. Anderson, what happened today? Emma showed extraordinary intelligence and courage, but she also showed that she completely trusts you. This girl loves you as much as you love her. After Beth left, Richard went upstairs to check on Emma one last time before going to sleep. She was lying in her bed, hugging a teddy bear they had bought together a few weeks earlier. Mr. Richard, she murmured in the dark. Are you there? Moo. Here. Thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for being so brave. Are we a real family now? Richard sat on the edge of the bed, gently touching the girl's face. We've always been a real family, Emma, since the first night you arrived here wet from the rain. I love you, Daddy. It was the first time she had called him Daddy. Tears welled up in Richard's eyes as he replied, "I love you too, daughter, more than you can imagine." That night, Chicago slept more peacefully. A child exploitation network had been dismantled, a dangerous man was being sought, and a 6-year-old girl had found what she had always looked for, a real home, where she was loved not for what she could do, but simply for existing. 3 months after the confrontation at the warehouse, Chicago was experiencing the first days of December. The city was preparing for Christmas, with colorful decorations adorning the streets and an atmosphere of hope in the air. In Richard's house in Lincoln Park, the changes were visible in every corner. What had once been an elegant but cold residence had been transformed into a true home. Emma's drawings were posted on the refrigerator, children's books were scattered around the living room, and the sound of laughter echoed through the corridors. Richard was in his home office when Beth arrived, for one of her follow-up visits, now much more spaced out and informal. "Where is our little artist?" she asked, immediately noticing the new drawings decorating the hallway walls. "In the garden, planting flowers for the bed she designed herself," replied Richard with a proud smile. "She said she wants the house to have colors everywhere." They walked to the window and could see Emma kneeling in the garden, her hands dirty with soil, concentrating on planting sunflower seedlings. She was wearing a yellow dress that Richard had bought specially to match the flowers she loved so much. "How has her adaptation to school been?" asked Beth. "Surprising. The principal of St. Mary's Academy says she's never seen a child so determined to learn. Emma wakes up every day excited to go to class." It was true. After Roger was finally captured 2 weeks after the confrontation, at the warehouse, Richard enrolled Emma in the best school in the area. At first she was nervous around so many new children, but her naturally affectionate personality soon won over classmates and teachers. "And how has she been dealing with—" "What happened?" Richard sighed. "She has nightmares occasionally, but she's doing therapy with a psychologist specialized in childhood trauma. Dr. Anna Caroline says Emma is processing everything in a very healthy way for a child who went through what she did." Beth nodded, satisfied. In all her years of work, she had rarely seen such a complete transformation as Emma's. The girl who had arrived wet and frightened on that stormy night had become a confident, joyful child, full of dreams. "And you, Richard, how are you adapting to fatherhood?" Richard laughed. "It's the most difficult and rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. I never imagined I could love someone so much, or that I could worry so much about another person. It changed your routine a lot. It changed everything. My company now has completely different operating hours because I insist on taking Emma to school and picking her up. My weekends are dedicated to parks, zoos, children's movies, and you know what? I've never been happier." Emma noticed Beth's presence through the window and ran toward the house, her hands still dirty with soil. "Miss B," she shouted, jumping into the social worker's arms, "did you come to see my garden?" "I did, and it's beautiful. Do you want to see my new room? Daddy let me choose everything, the colors, the furniture, even the curtains." Emma's room had been completely remodeled. The walls were painted lavender, her favorite color, and were covered with shelves full of books, toys, and the drawings she made in art class. The bed had a canopy like a princess's, and a special corner was reserved for her painting materials. "And look at this," said Emma, running to the desk. "I'm writing a book." She showed a notebook decorated with colorful stickers. On the pages, in her still childish but careful handwriting, she had begun to write the story of a girl who found a family after a big storm. "May I read it?" asked Beth. "You can, but I haven't finished it yet. My reading teacher is helping me with the harder words." Beth read the first paragraphs and felt her eyes well up. Emma was telling her own story, but transforming it into a magical adventure where fear turned into courage and loneliness turned into love. "It's becoming very beautiful, dear. When I finish, I'm going to give it as a present to Daddy for Christmas. He doesn't know. It's a surprise." That afternoon, Richard cancelled all his meetings to spend time with Emma and Beth. They went to Grant Park, where Emma had asked to feed the ducks in the lake. While the girl ran after the ducks with pieces of bread, Richard and Beth talked about the future. "The adoption papers were finalized yesterday," said Beth. "Officially, Emma is your daughter." "I know. The lawyer called me this morning. I haven't told her yet. I want it to be a Christmas surprise. She'll be emotional." "I hope so. I'm also thinking of giving her another present." "What kind of present?" Richard pointed to an empty lot on the other side of the park. "I'm going to build a shelter there. A place for children like Emma was, who need a temporary home while waiting for adoption." Beth turned to look at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I've already talked to architects, lawyers, social workers. It's going to be called Emma's Hope Home, a place where abandoned children can feel loved and safe while waiting for their permanent families." "Richard, that's amazing. Emma taught me that every child deserves to be seen, to be known, to be loved. I want other children to have the same opportunity she had." Emma ran back to them, holding a colorful feather she had found near the lake. "Look how pretty. I'm going to keep it in my diary." "What diary?" asked Richard. "The diary, where I write down the good things that happen to me every day. The teacher said it's important to remember the happy moments." Richard and Beth exchanged an emotional look. Even after everything she had been through, Emma chose to focus on the positive, on gratitude, on joy. At night, after Beth had left, Richard was helping Emma with her homework when she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, do you regret letting me in that night of the storm?" Richard stopped reviewing the math exercises and looked at her. "Why did you ask that?" "Because your life was easier before I arrived. You didn't have to worry about school, children's clothes, nightmares in the middle of the night." Richard closed the notebook and turned completely to Emma. "Emma, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. That night when you appeared wet in my garden was the most important night of my life. Not because it changed my routine or gave me responsibilities, but because it gave me the most precious thing that exists, a family." "Really? Really? Before you came, I had a house but not a home. I had money but I didn't have joy. I had success but I didn't have purpose. You gave me all of that." Emma threw herself into Richard's arms. "You gave me everything too. Daddy, you gave me a family, a home, security. But most importantly, you gave me the feeling that I'm special to someone. You are the most special person in the world to me." On December 23rd, Christmas Eve, Richard organized a small party at home. He invited Beth, Emma's teacher, some of her classmates, and even Dr. Anna Caroline, the psychologist. The house was decorated with colorful lights, a giant Christmas tree in the living room, and the smell of homemade cookies that Richard and Emma had baked together filling the environment. During the party, Richard asked for everyone's attention. "I want to thank each of you for being part of our journey this year. You helped us become a real family." He turned to Emma, who was at his side wearing a red Christmas dress. "Emma, you have a special present coming." "But Christmas is only tomorrow." "This present can't wait." Richard took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. "You can open it." With trembling hands, Emma opened the envelope and removed an official document. She still couldn't read completely, but she recognized some important words. "What does it say?" "Daddy?" "It says that officially, legally, forever, you are Emma Anderson, my daughter." The girl's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Forever? Really? Forever? Really?" The party transformed into a great celebration. All those present knew they were witnessing something special. Not just the formalization of an adoption, but the birth of a family that had been formed by the purest love. Later, when everyone had left, Richard and Emma were in the living room, admiring the Christmas tree. "Daddy," said Emma, "remember that first night when you said I deserved more than sleeping in the garden? I remember. You kept your promise. You gave me much more than I ever dreamed of having." Richard hugged his daughter, feeling immense gratitude for all the events that had led them to that moment. The storm that had brought Emma to him had been much more than a meteorological phenomenon. It had been the beginning of a journey that had completely transformed their lives. "Emma," he said softly, You also gave me much more than I ever dreamed of having. You gave me a purpose, a reason to be better, and most importantly, you gave me you. That night, as Emma slept in her princess bed, dreaming of Christmas presents and future adventures, Richard sat in the living room watching the tree lights, blinking softly. In less than a year, his life had changed completely. The lonely man who worked only to fill the inner void had transformed into a dedicated father, in love with his daughter and determined to make a difference in the lives of other children. Outside, Chicago continued its bustling nightlife, but inside that house in Lincoln Park, father and daughter slept in peace, knowing they had found in each other exactly what they had always sought, an unconditional love that would accompany them for the rest of their lives. The storm had passed long ago, but the rainbow it had brought would continue to shine forever. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Emma's story has deeply touched your hearts. This journey of unconditional love, courage, and transformation reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change our lives forever. To continue experiencing equally moving stories that explore family bonds and the power of true love, we've prepared a special playlist that you'll find by clicking here on the side. If this narrative moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the complexity and beauty of human life. Share in the comments which moment touched you most in Richard and Emma's story. We love reading your reflections and emotions. Don't miss our upcoming content, where we'll continue to explore the bonds that unite us and the transformations that true love can generate. Until our next story.